All right, I think we're going to get started. This is our last session, formal session of the Basic Income Congress. And actually this last session has 3 parts. The first will be the 3 illustrious gentlemen at the front of the room right now. And then the second part will be a video message from Andrew Yang. And then the third will be 3 additional illustrious individuals up here responding to the video content, I believe. All right, so let's get started. And at the very end, I believe Michael Howard's going to make a couple of announcements vis-a-vis what's happening next. About the parallel sessions, or?
You want to do that after the...
After everything, yeah. Okay, got it. So, without further ado, I'd like to reintroduce Karl Widerquist, Michael Howard, then Michael Lewis, who will be presenting a tribute to Erik, Olin, Wright.
Hi. Erik Olin Wright is sort of one of the founders of USBIG, so one of the reasons that we're having this conference. Our initial meeting of USBIG happened at, Michael and I had written our first paper on basic income, and we found the email addresses of people who had been writing on basic income in the United States lately, and we sent it around trying to get some feedback and things like that. And in 1998, when we went to BICN for the first time, Philippe von Parijs advised, we said, I'd like to get involved. He said, what we need really is somebody to organize something like this in the United States, rather than people in the United States getting involved with what was then the European network. So we came home and talked about doing that, and we sent an email to some of these people on the mailing list, or people we'd gotten feedback from, and Erik Wright and Fred Block were among those people. Then the initial meeting happened when Fred Block happened to be in New York in December of 1999. That means USBIG's 20th anniversary will be coming up this December. The initial meeting was Fred Block, Charlie Kark, Michael Lewis, Pam Donovan, and I at the Kiev Diner down in the East Village. And we created and named the network. And Erik Wright wasn't there, but he advised us via email or whatever. He and Fred Block are close associates. And he has been, he was an advisor he was an advisor of USBIG from the very start. He was writing on basic income long before that. So when he found out that he was dying last January, maybe he found out in December, and he wrote about it publicly, about how he'd been given only weeks to live. Having, through USBIG and through some other things, having known him for a while, I wrote something about him, and I'm basically just going to read that to you now, what I wrote at the time. Erik Olin Wright, a long-term advocate of universal basic income and one of the most influential sociologists today, recently announced that his doctors have advised him that he only has a few weeks to live. I wrote that on January 9th, and he died on January 23rd, so it was a very short time. He's best known for his work on social stratification, egalitarian alternative futures to capitalism, deep democracy, and intercidal revolution. But he has also had an important influence over the basic income movement. He was the first to describe basic income as a permanent strike fund for all. And if any union members can't see the enormous value this would be to the union movement overriding any other factors, I think they're just making an empirical error. He wrote about UBI and provided platforms such as his Real Utopias project, which included a book series and a conference series. And these platforms allowed other people to write about UBI when few people thought it had any chance. So he is one of the people that was keeping this idea alive and growing in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. Wright announced his diagnosis in a very brave and optimistic statement on January 5th, 2019. And let me read from that right now. I have roughly three weeks left of existence. 3 weeks. Let's call that January 2019. January 2019, my month, my last month. There can be surprises, both ways of course. My liver is the main source of leukemia's havoc. It is greatly enlarged now, filled with AML. This is why I need transfusions and platelets and red blood cells every day. The graft did not survive the return of AML, so it produces no products, and the AML clogged liver seems to be filtering out some of the transfusions, so I am not getting the full benefit from those. The result is that my platelets remaining extremely low even after platelet transfusions. My hemoglobin remains low even after hemoglobin transfusion. So eventually, these become too low to sustain life. Or an opportunistic infection does me in. The doctors say a few weeks. A nice surprise would be to slide into February. My birthday is February 9th. We'll see what happens. It's all hard to take in fully. I'm not in great turmoil over dying. I'm sad about many things, desperately sad about these connected to my family. But I'm not afraid. I wrote about this early on. My feelings haven't changed. I am stardust that randomly ended up on this marvelous corner of the Milky Way where some stardust ended up in conditions where it became complexly organized in a way we term alive. And then, even more complexly, conscious stardust that is fully aware of its consciousness. Amazing stardust. Inanimate products of exploding supernova organized in such a complex way that it is conscious of its own aliveness and consciousness. The greatest privilege in the whole immense universe. It may be for a limited time, this complex organization ends, and the stardust that is me will dissipate back into the more ordinary state of matter. Nothing to do about that. As creative, fanciful minds, we humans are good at inventing ways for our existence as consciousness beings to continue after the stardust dissipates. It would be nice. I don't believe in that sort of thing, but I'll find out by sometime in February. Some of his works on basic income include a podcast on basic income. Basic income is a social project in the Rutgers Journal of Law. Stakeholder grants, basic income, and class analysis, paper in redesigning redistribution in the universal basic income, stakeholder grants, and other proposals. And 2 redistributive proposals, universal basic income and stakeholder grants. I am one of the many people, this is me talking here. I'm one of the many people who have been influenced by his work. And his talents affected me personally. He was the editor of my first published academic article. The one Michael and I wrote together was the first academic article that we wrote, but not the first one we got published. Maybe it wasn't our best. It's a good piece of paper. It's all right. No. Took a while to get somebody into it. But the first one I got published was a paper called The Reciprocity Argument for the Guaranteed Income. And I know from some of the discussion earlier today, people are still ignoring this paper. 20 years old. This is the response to this idea that there's some reciprocity problem with basic income. The actual reciprocity problem is with a country that doesn't have basic income. But in 1999, before basic income had a name, I wrote this paper, so I call it a reciprocity argument for the guaranteed income. Well, basic income was a name out there, but it wasn't the standard name. There were a lot of names floating around back then. And it was, I sent it to the journal Politics and Society, where he was the editor, and they accepted it, and they made him the editor of it. And he wasn't just a copy editor, they made him a content editor. And his ability to see the intuitive leaps in my paper that I was making and explain how to fill them was amazing. That kind of ability takes not only a strong intellect, but strong sympathy. I mean, a combination of that even many great academics lack. You've got to be able to look at somebody's work, and you've got to think about what are they missing? What is it that they're assuming I know that I don't? How can I help them fill this in? The ability to do that takes more than a great mind. It's a mark of an exceptional person with great empathy for other people in their work. And that's what I wrote about him on January 9th, 2019.
Well, what I'd written, a lot of it, Karl has already said, so I'll simply add that for people who aren't that aware of Erik Olin Wright, he was a really big figure. Vivek Chibber, who's at NYU, said of him that he was the most important theorist of class in the second half of the 20th century and the greatest Marxist sociologist of his time. And we were very privileged to have him an important, very important contributing figure to this demi-monde of people interested in basic income. He was a big name. He was offered jobs at Harvard and Berkeley, and he turned them down because he wanted to stay in Wisconsin, where he thought he could do more valuable work. He was somebody who theorized egalitarianism, and he really lived an egalitarian life. I've never met anybody who was a student or a colleague of his who did not speak of his generosity with his time. He treated every undergraduate student like a colleague, just a wonderful person. And what he did just radiated out. His work multiplied the work of other people. Karl's given you an example. I first got interested in basic income partly because of Erik Olin Wright. I was thumbing through a volume he wrote on the theory of the social class, and I found an article on basic income. And in that context, I was interested in social classes and alternatives to capitalism, and suddenly the connection clicked, and I've been interested in basic income ever since. And I'll just add maybe one other thing that's of some relevance. Many of you have heard about this essay by Philip von Parijs and Robert van der Veen, Capitalist Road to Communism. And he was one of the respondents when that essay was written. He was part of a group known as the September Group, otherwise known as the No Bullshit Marxists. His response was, the title was, Why Something Like Socialism is Necessary to Get to Something Like Communism. And it wasn't that he was against the capitalist road to communism, but he says if you pursue that, at some point you're going to start challenging the fundamental property relations of capitalism, the power relationships. That's part of the process. And so basic income, it's the goal, but you'll need socialism ultimately to get there. But interestingly, basic income is part of the path to the goal. And that's the kind of question he was interested in throughout his career. And for that kind of question, I think many of us are deeply grateful and hope to, carry on that work as best we can. So I think that's what I would say.
I'll start with a story, and it'll come to Erik. About 2 or 3 months ago, Ari and I, Ari's over there, we are roommates and also married, and we were on the train, and I saw this woman who appeared to be about 22 years old, and she was reading this red book I'd read in grad school, the Marx Engels Reader, and I was like, wow, you don't see that much. And so, and I'll talk to people. I mean, I will talk to people on trains. I don't know, I just do that. So I asked her, I was like, what, are you doing that for a class? I mean, like, why are you reading that book? She said, no, I'm just, I've heard a lot about Marx and Marxism, and I'm just trying to find out what it's about, from the horse's mouth. And, I thought about that, and I thought about, AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Bernie Sanders called himself a democratic socialist, gave a speech, last week on democratic socialism, and I'm old enough to know that, there was a time when people weren't so open about being socialist. in this country, and thinking Marx had something to say and things like that. And so there may be a moment where that's changing. I mean, we'll see, I guess, but it might be. And this brought me back to Erik, because Erik, he's been around for a long time. And I'm a sociologist by training, and I'm kind of one, I guess, for real, but by training I'm certainly one. And he is well known in sociology, as Mike said, very well known. And he's most known in sociology for class analysis and sort of a Marxist lens on social life, and an attempt to update Marx, because Marx wrote a while ago, and some things have changed since then. And so Erik Olin Wright really tried to rigorously update Marx and take what was still relevant and get rid of what wasn't, at a time when it was still pretty risky to say you were a socialist, right, or a Marxist. So I imagine if he were around, and I guess he was around to see some of it, if he were around still, he might be tickled by folks on trains reading Marx and Engels readers in New York subways. That's it.
Thank you for that. Can we get the, yes. The next. So this next is a short message, at least that's how it's labeled in the program, from Andrew Yang, and it's a greeting to us, so it's specifically taped for us.
I'm so sorry I couldn't be there with you this year, but I appreciated the invitation so much, and I want to be there next year, hopefully as I'm riding the wave towards the nomination, Democratic nomination for president. You all probably know that I've qualified for the first 2 Democratic primary debates in June and July, which will be on NBC and CNN. So this to me is a great step forward for the basic income movement. But there would be no movement without people like you who've been working on it for years, in some cases decades. I've learned so much from so many of you, and it's inspiring what brings you all together, where you've been talking about how we can improve our societies and really advance our entire species for the last number of years. And your ideas, hopefully you see, have animated me in this campaign. And the time is now. You can see there's been a dramatic surge in the interest in basic income, and we can fight to make it a reality, not in some far-off future, but today in the United States of America, and then from there to the rest of the world. Now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the process of how one becomes president of the United States, just because it might be of interest. So some of you aren't Americans, you're from Canada and other countries, and the way you become president is you have to win a party's nomination. The way you win a party's nomination is you go through the early states of Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, and South Carolina. So in Iowa, there will be about 250,000 Iowans who are caucusing. And so in order for me to be on the fast track to the White House, I need to get about 50,000 Iowans who are going to caucus and be on board with universal basic income. So all of the things that you're all talking about, we can make reality if we just get 50,000 Iowans excited about basic income. And if that seems like an historic opportunity to you, that's exactly the opportunity that we have to make happen in 2020. Now, you all likely have heard about my basic income proposal, the Freedom Dividend, which would put $1,000 a month in the hands of every American adult starting at age 18. Now, I decided to have it kick in at age 18 in large part because then it would go to the individual, him or herself, and not to their guardian. So you can imagine, as a parent myself, if you could go to your son or daughter and say, when you turn 18, you'll receive $1,000 a month from your country because your country loves you, your country values you, and we care about your future. That is a game changer. That's one of the reasons why I had it kick in at 18, also from various other proposals that have been studied who proposed this. And many of you might know that the plan I'm championing was originated by a guy named Andy Stern, who used to run the SEIU in the United States, and was then studied by the Roosevelt Institute. So these are one of the reasons. This is one of the reasons why I made the Freedom Dividend follow these guidelines, because it had already been proposed and studied. Now, when you're looking to finance something like this, to me, the big change we have to account for is what's happening in our economy. Where Amazon, a $1 trillion tech company, paid zero in federal taxes in the United States last year, despite producing tens, hundreds of billions of dollars in revenue, and it's absorbing another $20 billion in commerce every year, causing 30% of malls and stores to close. So how do you get the money to pay for a dividend? You have to have a mechanism where Americans benefit from all of this innovation and technological progress. And the best way to do that, in my view, is a value-added tax, which is something that every other major economy has already adopted. And so with a value-added tax in the American economy, we would generate over $800 billion in new revenue, which combined with economic growth and cost savings and value gains from having a stronger, more educated population, would pay for a dividend. Now, other people are focused on certain other ways to try and address the fourth industrial revolution, which we're in the midst of. In my view, the reason why Donald Trump's our president today is that we'd automated away 4 million manufacturing jobs in the Midwest, and we're about to do the same to millions of retail jobs, call center jobs, fast food jobs, truck driving jobs, and on and on. Now, some people are championing a jobs guarantee, and there are certainly elements of that that would be welcome. For example, a dramatic investment in infrastructure would create hundreds of thousands of jobs here in the States, and it would create immense value and address our crumbling streets and bridges. But if you were to say that the federal government should employ everyone, then that would wind up creating many, many difficult situations where people didn't want to do a job or didn't get along with their supervisor, or their job wasn't a good fit for whatever reason, but they were dependent on that job to meet their basic needs. And you'd have to create an immense new structure to be able to employ and monitor all these people that the government was now employing. So while a government job should be a piece of the puzzle, we should not be turning to that as our primary recourse in a time of automation. The last question you wanted me to address was whether the Freedom Dividend would complement, replace, or have a mixed relationship with the existing welfare state. And to me, the goal is to provide something that people would prefer to the existing welfare state, but not take anything away from folks who need those benefits in order to meet their needs. And so while it would be universal, it would be opt-in, and if you opt in, then you would forego benefits from certain cash and cash-like programs in the US. But we would be more than doubling the amount of money that's going to citizens and dramatically improve people's health, mental health, and ability to control their own futures. So if you want to make this happen, again, you're all coming together, you're passionate about trying to advance basic income. We don't have to talk to each other anymore. We can talk to our entire country and the entire world. And that's what's happening with my campaign right now. I am now in CNN's top 10. I'm one of only 11 candidates who is qualified for the Democratic primary debates. Raised over $3 million in increments of only $19 each. And so people have looked at my polling numbers, which are between 2 and 3% in different states. To use Iowa as an example, I'm at 2% in Iowa, and only 5% of Iowans say they've heard a lot about me. So that's a tremendous ratio, and it shows that we can grow and grow. Now, you all have been studying this for years, and I hope that you're thrilled by the prospect of actually getting this front and center on the debate stage, into the White House, and past the threshold. We do not have unlimited time. Our economy is transforming very quickly. The robot trucks are going to be on the highways in 5 to 10 years. And so the country and the world needs us to succeed. So I hope you'll join me in this. I hope you are thrilled at the prospect of the ideas that you've been studying for years, making it into the mainstream, and then transforming our societies for the better. And congratulations on all you do. Again, I've learned so much from all of you at NABIG, and hopefully this time next year, when you're in the States and having your giant gathering, I will be there in person, and we will be high-fiving the fact that universal basic income is on the cusp of becoming law. Thank you so much. Have a great time today.
Thank you. May I invite Almaz, Scott, and Larry to the stage? So I figured we could just go in the order in which you appear in the program. Does that work? So
What's that order?
Almaz, then Larry, then Scott.
Sure.
Okay,
Thank you.
the floor is yours.
Thank you. We made it to the final session of this giant gathering. So I will just start out by saying I will answer one of Andrew Yang's questions. Yes, I am delighted to have a candidate for the Democratic nomination of the President of the United States who is advocating basic income. Unequivocally delighted to have that as part of the major part of a platform for a candidate, and to have that embodied in a candidate who I think is as articulate and passionate spokesperson for basic income as Andrew Yang is. I think that he is part of a wave of Democratic candidates who are all campaigning, or many are campaigning on very progressive issues that will help promote economic security in the United States. And it's great that basic income is part of the debate of included in the debates with Medicare for All, the LIFT plan, and so on. I'm sort of struggling about what to say about his message, because I think the Democrats in the United States overemphasize policy details when we're thinking about our presidential candidates. We love policy wonky candidates like Hillary Clinton, like Bill Clinton, like Al Gore. And where has that gotten us today? Not to a good place. I think that Andrew Yang looks a little flat to me on that video message. I think in person, in fact, I saw him on this very stage in person several months ago. I think he's a much more vibrant and charismatic candidate, and so I think that works to his advantage and to our advantage as well. So I know that as a politician, he's got to simplify his message. He's got to think about the demographic that he is appealing to. If I got up on the Democratic debate stage and advocated for a wealth tax, for a very redistributive basic income, we would be having 4 more years of President Trump, I'm very sure. But since I'm a policy person, that's what I'm going to talk about here. So I just want to make a couple of points about his perspective on basic income, and what I think is positive and what I think is a little bit more problematic. Okay, so we've had a couple of sessions on automation and employment at the Congress now. And I think that Andrew Yang's emphasis on automation as a motivating reason for proposing a basic income is problematic in the ways that we've discussed in some of those sessions. Automation and the robot trucks that are coming in 5 to 10 years, as he says, that's a problem that is part of the present, it's part of the past, it's part of the future. I don't think it's the only problem that we should be thinking about a basic income solving. He didn't mention it in this message, and he doesn't highlight it again, probably for sound political reasons, but he does mention on his website that he wants to reduce poverty with a basic income. And I think that the 2 biggest problems that we have in the United States are the continuing poverty that we have in the richest country in the world, and also high and increasing levels of inequality. And Andrew Yang doesn't really mention inequality at all when he talks about basic income. And again, maybe that's for sound political reasons. But I believe that the reasons that the problems that you are trying to solve, dictate the solution that you propose to solve it. And so the fact that he's not really focusing on inequality means that some of his ideas about financing the basic income, and of course the basic income structure that he's suggesting, which goes only to adults and not to children, will mean that his basic income will not reduce inequality in a measurable, significant way. As many of you know, I very strongly believe that basic income has to go to children as well as adults. I mean, of course, if the basic income is high enough for the adult, then it could solve poverty for our most vulnerable families, which are single-parent families with children, where one parent has the dual responsibility of earning income from wages and also providing for care of children or other dependents, a problem that two-parent families don't face. So a basic income that only goes to adults, it's only $1,000 a year, could raise a two-parent family or a two-couple household to the poverty threshold, the very meager, inadequate poverty threshold that we have in the United States, but it doesn't do that for a single-parent family. So you could make the basic income higher, and so that a basic income of $24,000 for an individual would raise a family of four that has just one parent in it to the poverty threshold. It's obviously a much more costly basic income than one that would be maybe $6,000 per person that includes children as well. I can say a little bit more about the fact that he suggests basic income. His freedom dividend is it's not exactly basic income minus, but it's not exactly basic income plus, because he gives individuals the option to choose the basic income or their benefits, but not to combine both. Now, I think in some cases, for some of us, it would be very clear whether it would be in our interest to take the basic income or not. I think for many of our most vulnerable families who are the beneficiaries of multiple programs that are all quite meager and none of which really bring you up to a level of economic security, it's a harder calculation to make. So that's one thing that worries me about the way he's proposed the basic income. And I will just end by saying that we had a great presentation by Max Guinness this morning about his Open UBI, in which he's put Andrew Yang's elements of his basic income proposal into his model and can demonstrate what the effect would be for different deciles, families, and so on. Andrew Yang's basic income is financed by a VAT tax, but also has several other financing mechanisms, some of which are a little bit more progressive. VATs tend to be a little bit more aggressive, others are more progressive. But the essential problem that I see that basic income can solve is that income from wages, labor income, no longer brings families economic security in the United States. And the only way to address that is to give families another source of income, and the only other source of income is income from capital. So I think we've got to be redistributing capital, and we can do that either by, as Erik, Olin, Wright maybe would have suggested, the road to communism going through socialism, actual communal ownership of the means of production. Or I think we can do it another way, which is to leave ownership where it is, but to give all citizens beneficial ownership of the means of production by giving us all a dividend, a capital dividend of money that is not from labor income, but is a dividend from our shared economic resources. And so I think we really need to tax wealth in order to finance a basic income that's going to have a measurable effect on economic inequality. I'll leave it there.
It's hard to believe that in just a couple of years, and I've only been involved in the basic income movement, I've only known about basic income for about 5 years since I read Scott's first articles in 2014. But the conversation has moved so fast, and I just wanted to take this moment to thank all of you who have been fighting this good fight pretty quietly but strongly together, collaborating and keeping up this idea for so long, especially when there were times where it was more widely known and then it sort of moved away from the public consciousness. So as Andrew mentioned, without all of the efforts of people in this room and Erik, Cohen, Wright, and those who've come before us, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. We really would be having a different kind of conversation. And it's just a testament to, like, we're not there yet, but man, have we gone a far distance. And that's something worth recognizing. That being said, I look at what Andrew is proposing, and I do understand that, and I think that it's definitely not the most perfect version that anyone could create for a basic income point for what it could be offered to everybody. However, it's interesting because even within this room, there is constant discussion about what is that point in the first place, right? That has been something that has been discussed for a long time. And what I think Andrew has done is take this moment in time and really put down a flag, take the points and the arguments and the discussions that have been built for the past number of decades from people in this room, and try to synthesize them into something that can be really easily digestible and understood by the general public. And I agree, could it be UBI plus, could it be a slightly different form of UBI? Sure. But what he's done is a little bit of a political calculation and a little bit of simplification. And I think if we're at the point where an idea like this gets to the point of electing someone who's running on this as a platform and gets to the White House, I am pretty sure that he is going to work as hard as he can to push for the strongest, most robust version of basic income that can be done. And if we're at the point where someone like him actually gets elected, then I believe then there will have been a large groundswell of support to believe in that kind of a vision. I really do believe that. I think this is a unique opportunity in time to rally people together around this movement. And again, no one agrees with everyone 100% of the time, but sometimes you recognize that there is an opportunity and a moment where people can really get involved and really contribute something to making something happen after you've worked so hard for so long to get the ideas of basic income out there. And now it's happening. And so now the world is actually ready to hear the voices that have been working on this. So I personally am a fan of the approach and what he's trying to do. You know, I think that there's more that can be done, and those are discussions that we can continue to have and push him on. And I think our job then becomes to push as hard as we can to fight for the strongest version of basic income with the most progressive version that we can push. I think it's just something that we need to recognize as an amazing opportunity to take a moment to celebrate and then get back to work so that we can really make this happen in the next couple of years.
I'm going to go a little bit off of Larry's here and actually kind of do the opposite of Almaz here, where I'm not even going to even consider any of the details of what Andrew Yang is proposing. Let's take a big picture look, and I also kind of want to take up a mirror to all of us here. So I was talking a little bit with Michael about this just a little bit before this started too. I think we need to be asking ourselves some questions. So, first of all, just look around the room and just think about the fact, too, that right now there's a presidential candidate running on a fully universal basic income of a poverty level amount of $1,000 per month as a dividend owed everybody as their share of the economy. And how many of you here would raise your hand and consider yourselves as a full-fledged member of the Yang Gang? Full-fledged. So yeah, so just look around a little bit and say, I don't know, it's about like 10, say something like that. There's about 50 people in the room. And we're in New York City, too. So what is the population of New York City? Say it's like a few million or something, right? 8 million now?
New York City, 8 million, New York State, 19.
All right. So where is everybody? Like, there is a huge growing number of people interested in Andrew Yang. And where are they? Like, why aren't they here? Why isn't this an overcrowded room with people excited they just heard about basic income for the first time? And then they hear that there's a Congress in New York, and it's been going, this is the 18th one. And every other year it's here. Like, oh wow, I can't believe this. Like in my backyard, I can come here and learn more about basic income, this idea that I've just heard about and love to learn more about. So where is everybody?
Conference was limited to 200.
If
It
that,
shocked
that's
us.
fair.
It shocked
If-
us from Canada
If we had a
too.
bigger venue.
If there was like a 1,000-person waiting list or something, sure. But yeah, so I think that's something we need to be asking, like, why aren't we reaching people? Because Yang is reaching people. He is, he kind of exploded when he went on Joe Rogan, and Joe Rogan was an audience with 5 million people. And it's funny too, even before he was on Joe Rogan, I had people coming to me and they're like, I don't know, Scott, maybe you should talk to Yang about this. I don't think that he should go on Joe Rogan. It's kind of a white nationalist kind of thing. We don't want to be affiliated with that. And what kind of questions he might ask. He might make basic income look bad. And he was on Joe Rogan and it exploded. And from there, he's just gotten tons of media coverage. And so many people are hearing about basic income for the first time and getting really excited about this idea. And I think that, for some reason, these aren't mixing. We should be able to build off that. Like, there should be a lot of people really interested and wanting to learn more. And here, this is a very academic setting. And it's funny too, like, Almaz, I love you, and you know I do. But like, even it's just a good example. Like the first response is just like picking apart the details of the idea. And he's talking about big picture, basic income. And this is something that everyone has wanted here. We've been fighting for this for decades, and it's like happening. Like he's got a legitimate and like actual possible path to the White House. And it's growing at what's a necessary amount to get that. The numbers are growing. That path is possible. It's not like some joke possibility. I mean, there are already even people talking about like, oh yeah, he can make it top 5. He's already made top 10 lists, and he's considered to be, around 8 or 9 right now, of over 20 people. And so this election is going to happen next year, and so it's possible that he could help build up enough momentum where we could achieve basic income in the U.S. in 2021 if there's enough support. Like if you're able to build enough support for this, it's possible. So it's just funny too to think about this where there's so many different panels and they're talking about like, pilots or no pilots and like, what's the way to do a pilot? Should we do like 5 years and where should we do this? And like, we can achieve this right now. So I guess I would just encourage people to kind of just, put some of the details in the back burner kind of thing and just be like, all right, how can we help build this? Because there is a possibility right now for this wave to build high enough. And there's so much knowledge in this room that's been accumulated, and we know so many people with so much knowledge, and there's a lot of people learning about basic income for the first time with none of that. So it'd be great to actually be able to help use that knowledge and inform all these people so that they're able to really even push for these things that we're detailing about. I totally agree that he needs a child allowance and it should be added into it. And I also don't discount that he won't add it because he's got an ever-increasing platform. His policy page is over 100 different policy proposals and it's just getting bigger. So I wouldn't put that past him, and he's already modified his plan, over time so far. So I guess I just want to encourage everybody, like, how can you, help with the Yang Gang? Like, maybe even find your local chapters and help inform them. Help, use your networking and get that out there and just kind of remind people that, hey, that basic income could be real. It could happen. And also even start thinking about afterwards. So let's just say that Yang doesn't win. And let's even say that maybe he got really close. And he got really close too because basic income was like the big thing. So you've got like a whole population of the US that is hungry for basic income. And then what next? How are we going to utilize that? And so I think that's the question even to start asking as well. All right, I guess that's it. Thank you.
So I thought we'd use the last part of this panel or forum to facilitate more of a discussion rather than keeping it a strict Q&A. So maybe what I would ask is we'll take 3 comments. That seems to be the new norm for these congresses. But if you could please keep your comments or questions short so that we really can get some conversation going. So the gentleman in the front, and hold your responses till we get 3.
What could be the reason for him not including children within the plan?
And then there's in the middle, striped glass.
Hi, it's Jennifer. I just wanted to say that he had touched on it at the end. I think he's not saying there's nothing for children. It's about coming to that decision of universal child tax benefits that goes to everybody below a certain level of income, which would be $1,000 or something, and then you have the dividend, which would be $2,000, and who can't survive on that? A lot of people already are, and that would be, I think, a total answer for the outcome. So his policies are in the right direction, and if that's added in right, then I think we actually have some place to go forward, and even if he doesn't win, somebody else runs for the same thing.
And then there's, in the last row, right there, orange shirt.
And just to clarify, because we're from Canada, in Canada we have a child tax credit, and it is called a child tax credit because it's based on income as opposed to what we're talking about here, which is a basic for adults, so that we don't pay for the child. It's just clawed back if a person has an income of over, I think, $70,000 or $80,000, just to let you know. So there is already something separate in Canada already, and we would not want to take that away. We would want to add a BIG to that for the adults.
These are more comments. Do you want to respond to any of these?
Just more of a comment, a clarification.
Yeah, me too.
So Karl has his hand up. You want to?
Yeah, I want to say, when he spoke here at the Silberman School last October, and Almaz and Michael and I and some others were here. We questioned him on this rather small basic income model, and for him that was more of a starting point. It's not a ceiling for him. He was very clear about that. This is a starting point. He wants it higher. And he said the main reason he chose this plan was that it was a costed out. It was a plan that was already costed out. He needed something that was costed out. So it's not like this is what he thinks is the best plan there is either. Also, Almaz was there, and Almaz was, I think, a little less skeptical of leaving kids out than you are now. At the time, which is one of the reasons I looked to you on that issue, because I know you push very hard on this issue. That made me sympathetic. But one interesting thing about our thought here: should we endorse? I mean, as individuals, not as an organization, we can't endorse Yang, but as individuals, should we endorse Andrew Yang? This man has endorsed us. He said as much in his presentation here. He's endorsed us. It's really hard for me not to like somebody who likes me.
Larry, did you want to respond? Oh, Almaz, go ahead.
If I didn't make it clear that I'm voting for Andrew Yang, I want to make that clear. I hope that's okay with Silberman that I'm endorsing Andrew Yang here. I want to make that absolutely clear, but I feel like that's sort of taken for granted, right, that we're going to do that. I just want to respond to a couple of things. One is that in that conversation, Karl, that we had, one of the things I did press him on is whether he would consider a wealth tax, and his answer was very clearly no. As we know, he comes from the tech industry. One of the reasons he's running and is able to run and get basic income on the agenda is because he has personal wealth. That's not, I don't want to hold that against him. I want wealthy people, in this battle for basic income as well. But there are many ways to start a basic income, right, to increment. And I absolutely believe in incrementing a basic income rather than piloting one. You can implement from a basic income that's targeted to adults, or you can implement from a child benefit, or for a smaller universal benefit as well. So I don't, yes, this is within this group. I am being, somewhat critical of the way he's doing it. That's not the message I take out into the world. I'm fully supportive of him. But I do think that we should be able to discuss whether, this particular alternative is, better for our movement than the one that he's, another one that we might propose. Why does he not want a child basic income? I think it's because of political expediency. So I know that because I've written about this, that when the Yang Gang sees posts on Twitter, for example, about a child basic income, you get very nasty comments about, well, we don't want to incentivize women to have children. So I think that it's, I don't think it's a coincidence that the 10 people who raised their hands here as members of the Yang Gang were all men. Right, as fully committed members of the Yang Gang were, that's all I saw, was men raising their hands, not women.
And you?
I didn't raise my hand.
No, you didn't raise
I'm not part of the Yang
So
Gang.
then maybe it's in the Yang Gang.
And we're Canadian. Like, you got my hand, you got it.
Right, so, and we know that a lot of his supporters, a lot of people who self-identify as the Yang Gang are men. I'm not, there's nothing wrong with that. We need men to support our Democratic nominee, but we also know that presidential candidates in the Democratic Party are heavily reliant on African American women voting for them. They're also reliant on low-skilled or men who want manufacturing jobs or formerly had them and no longer have them. But the Democratic Party is a coalition. So I think Yang's basic income proposal, I believe, is part of the reason he structured it the way he has is because he's targeting a particular demographic, and he seems to be very successful at that. But he's not going to win, not necessarily going to win the Democratic nomination, targeting that demographic if he excludes others, and he may well not win the presidential election, should he get the nomination, if he targets that the demographic and excludes others. So I'm here to represent the women's point of view. I don't claim at all to speak for all women. There may be plenty of women who are completely happy with the proposal that Yang is putting forward, but I'm calling it as I see it.
Who is he targeting?
I think he's
Who do you think he's targeting?
He's targeting men who will be displaced by robots, right? As we heard earlier in the presentation on automation, automation is primarily a problem for working-aged men, not because it doesn't displace women as well, but because women have a broader range of jobs that they're willing to do. Well, right, and because of gender norms, men are not willing to do the service jobs that are lower paid and lower status, that are going to be more, that are going to increase in numbers as manufacturing jobs and traditionally male jobs decrease because of automation. So I think that when your message about basic income is on the automation, the robot front, I believe you're implicitly targeting working-age men. And again, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that. This is a crisis for working-age men that we need to solve, but it's not necessarily speaking to me.
I think just to be fair too, he does speak about unpaid care work a lot. So I think that's the way that he's reaching women as well. There might be a natural inclination for men to be more interested in the automation angle, but he definitely is talking about how GDP doesn't measure what's important, and how we should measure things like mortality rates, infant mortality rates, maternal mortality rates, these kinds of things as well. So fair enough. I wouldn't say that he's just only targeting men.
Yeah, and I agree with that, but I'm just saying again, the balance of the implications of the program will be a little bit less beneficial for women who have this double burden of earned income, requirements now to earn income, and also to provide most of our unpaid care, as well as our low-paid care in society.
And he may be citing it as just as an example, for which UBI needed. It doesn't mean that
Can you use the mic when you talk, because otherwise nobody can hear you but the people on the stage. Right here.
Well, I can just speak along that too. You're just talking about automation and
I was thinking
why.
that he may be only citing this automation as an example why UBI is needed. It doesn't mean that he is only seeking support of that segment of population for himself. I mean, that may be just a coincidence.
I wouldn't even say I think it's very strategically smart, and I think that, you know, even like we've had some panels over the last couple of days and discussion around, like, you know, how should we talk about technology? We just had that today. How should we talk about automation? What's the point? You know, these kinds of things, and it's like, what should be the main way of talking about basic income? And I think that what it comes down to in the U.S. is that the main reason that basic income has seen a resurgence in the U.S. is because of the discussion around automation, and because that people are thinking it applies to them. You know, like, there's always been good reasons for basic income. Poverty reduction, great. Inequality reduction, great. But like, technology is something where people think, this is me. Like, I might lose my income security. What about my kids? What are they going to do for a living? So technology makes it personal, and which is why it's so effective. And the fact that he is talking about it through that angle is also why I think he's being so effective.
Let's get a couple more thoughts from the floor right here.
Yeah, more like an advice from me. What would be your thoughts, reflections about these difficult conversations now that elections are coming, regarding when they ask you if you're in favor of the basic income? And I'm going to explain myself. Because when someone asks me if I'm in favor of the basic income, the first thing I have to know what version they're talking about, right? So I have asked people, and they have come from a very, very broad perspective, and have been how we can bring this conversation of, like, I'm not in favor of that type of basic income, but I'm in favor of basic income. So that connection now is with what we're talking about, is what we're going to do with a lot of politicians start saying they're in favor of basic income, and we do not fall in this type of, in this thing of approving, I don't know the word, like, or endorsement all candidates that speak and say the word basic income, right? How we can bring this conversation in the next elections. And because as I can say in Puerto Rico, in my case I'm from Puerto Rico, the governor, if he put a basic income, he would measure oxygen, and it would say, like, how much oxygen the people need to live, and that would be the basic income, right? So I would be against that, right? So how we can talk to people that are going to begin to ask about it when they begin to see politicians talking about basic income, and there will be ones that they're your favorite ones.
Well, I think we can hold them to the standard that Andrew has put out as his proposal, right? People will start having their own fleshed out proposals because they'll have to. Because people will say, well, which basic income version is it? Again, we here in the room understand that that definition is a little fluid, and that people can argue for different kinds, but Andrew has staked his claim as this is his version of it. And so you can either be for it, or you can be for a different one, or not at all, but at least it's something to be able to call out the details. I think that's been a huge part of this. It's not saying, you know, economic security for everybody, like, that's important. He's saying, these are the details. And he tries to pull it together in a nonpartisan way, and recognizing that automation is nonpartisan idea with bipartisan impact. And so, because he's pulling people from both sides with a direct plan, that's giving people the option to say, this is making sense to me. And he's pulling people from both sides that's saying, this speaks to me. So I think that other versions will be created by other people. If this, if this continues to grow, they'll come up with their own version. People will choose for themselves, but you won't be able to say, I think of, not Andrew's version, but something else. You're gonna have to say what that is. So he's really kick-started off that process.
I just want to ask a quick question too in response. Do you support universal health care?
Yes, yes.
Aren't you going to ask what version of universal health care?
No, but I don't believe in universal basic income. I believe in the basic income, but not the universalism part of it.
And it reminds me too of what Almaz was talking about earlier about like Social Security and like if we tested it or not. Like when you say, would you support Social Security? What version of Social Security? I mean, like what we're talking about here is like a human right that's missing. And so, I mean, if you don't support it, then you might not see it, you know, as a human right. But I think it's important to actually push this as something that everyone deserves. And when it comes to like a right, you don't argue over the details really of what it means. Like even like in Switzerland, when 23% of them voted on this and they voted yes, it wasn't over like the numbers in the plans. They said, okay, do you have a right to a sufficient amount of income that's sufficient for dignity as a citizen of Switzerland? And they voted on that, and they just figured, okay, well, we're just going to go, if now people support it, then it'll go through the process, and it'll go through the details, and politicians, and you argue this out. That's where the details come in. So I even look at it from that way, where I just think it's important to look at UBI as a concept, and people should support it or not support it, and then if there's enough support, then we can get it passed and work on the details.
Let's get Penny, and then the gentleman in front of Penny, and then Francisca. So right in that cluster.
My question's been answered.
Excellent. So the gentleman right in front of, in the white shirt, and then Francisca after that.
Yes. First off, I agree with Scott and Karl. I mean, that's why I raised my hand for the Yang Gang. I mean, if I have a chance to cast a vote in the Democratic presidential primary, it's going to be for Andrew Yang. I was afraid in the video he was going to ask us to go to Iowa. I'm not sure I know that. But anyway, I think that, as Scott was hinting, he's very strategic about this. He comes across as a visionary. And so this idea, and coming from Silicon Valley and everything, focusing on what's going to happen, which is unknown, and might get people to consider something that they would not consider otherwise, as opposed to getting bogged down in the history and all the other debates that have been taking place for years about poverty. So I really think that we need to give them the benefit of the doubt.
Right, yes.
Francisca, the other way.
Yeah, I actually have a question. I'm sorry to backtrack into the nasty details, but I would like to know more about the value-added tax and how it exactly works, especially in opposition to sales tax. I don't really understand the difference yet. And one thing I was curious about that Andrew Yang mentioned in the video was that it could be used to kind of bring back the profits that Amazon and other tech companies made. And I don't really understand how that is supposed to work, because usually VAT is perceived more as a kind of regressive taxation. And I overall kind of miss more progressive taxation elements in his policy, since we also heard he doesn't really endorse the wealth tax. So I'd just like to know more about the mechanism behind the VAT.
Because we were just to talk about taxes. Did they have a VAT in Shanghai actually?
They do have a VAT in China. I don't know how it works in China. Francesca, you should be explaining to us how VAT works, because you're German, and the European countries have the VATs. But I'll do my best. A VAT is a tax. A value-added tax is a percentage of tax on the value of the product as it's being created. So the tax is lower on sort of raw materials, apples, let's say, and the apples that you eat, and much higher on something like an Apple computer, which goes through many stages of production and has many inputs to it. So you'd pay a higher rate of taxation on a computer than you would on a basic food product. Do I have that right, Christina?
No, actually. So okay, it's the same rate. It's higher amounts. So you start with like.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, the same rate, but higher amounts as you go through the production process.
And so one of the reasons why it's like different than a sales tax is that a sales tax is only applied at the end, and a VAT is along each chain, so along production. And what's interesting about it is it incentivizes people to actually report that tax and pay it, because if they do that, then they're able to get some back from the previous thing. So it like adds up along the way. And then it's almost like a collectively or a decentralized kind of IRS kind of system, where like everyone's like self-policing because it's in their own best interest to do that. So, like, when Yang talks about this, he's saying, it's on, like, every transaction, and every slice, and this kind of that. And it's true to a degree where it can be entirely passed on, or it could come out of their revenue. So, like, Amazon could say, all right, we don't want to raise our prices this much, so we are going to actually reduce our revenue and pay a little bit of this tax out of our revenue, but we are going to pass some on to the consumer because we don't do the whole thing. So it's somewhere between that. But then what's interesting too is that even though it's passed on, and it usually would be regressive, because it's paired with the basic income, then there's actually a net benefit such that those at the top are consuming far more than they are paying, than they are receiving the VAT. So they're actually, could be paying $15,000, $20,000, $30,000 in VAT, and only receiving $12,000 in UBI back. Whereas those at the bottom, let's say, are paying $100 in VAT and receiving $12,000.
But the reason it's generally considered regressive is because people at the lower end of the income scale are consuming more of their income than people at the higher end of the income scale. But it is paired with other financing sources, including financial transactions tax, carbon tax, also eliminating the limit on the payroll tax that we have in the United States, which ends at about $115,000. So it would continue on and capturing more income of higher income earners, and then there would be some savings from programs that people opt out of. Is there another one? And treating capital gains the same way as income here in the U.S. So the overall package is more progressive than a VAT would be on its own. I just wanted to answer or touch on another question that was raised a little bit earlier, if I can find it. One of the things that, Scott, that you said is that automation makes, the problem really, sort of personal. And I would push back on that because poverty and economic insecurity has been personal for many parts of the population.
Absolutely.
Before automation, it has nothing to do with automation.
But the difference is no one wants to think that they're poor or will be poor.
Again, I think that's not true. I think a lot of people think that they are poor and are in the trenches with the very faulty social assistance program that we have now. And so basic income would be a huge improvement over that, right? Again, and Andrew Yang's basic income would be a huge improvement over that as well. We are here in an academic conference, as you said. We don't have the Yang, the Yang voters, Yang supporters here. We're basic income experts here. So, I hope that this is a space in which we can actually be critical and try to improve the policy proposals of the people who carry the more public banner for basic income. Someone like Andrew Yang. So that's entirely the way that I am, engaging with his ideas here. Again, on the outside, I fully support Andrew Yang. Within this group, I think that he said in his video, and he said to us when he was here in October, that he has looked to this group for inspiration, for research, and he said in the video that he looked to Andy Stern's book. Again, Andy Stern is more focused on the automation question as well. I think it's up to us, those of us who have been thinking about the other aspects of what a basic income can do, to push back on him, for that. But we do that in the family setting, and when it's time to talk to voters about basic income, then we're fully supportive of him, because I agree, it's a once in a generation chance, once in a lifetime chance to get this kind of progressive social policy on the political agenda.
I'm going to assert my position as chair to actually piggyback on what Almaz is saying, especially because we are having this Congress at the School of Social Work in the middle of East Harlem. So just in terms of poverty, I know that it's not politically expedient to talk about poverty in the presidential campaign. That's unfortunate, and I think in terms of the point you're making about it not being personal, it's personal to the vast majority of the people who live in this this particular community. I'm a social worker, I work in this community, and I can tell you that the New York Times reported last year 1 in 5 children in this community was at some point homeless within the past 12 months. So that's an enormous, that's their experience. The poverty rates are highest, at least in New York City, the poverty rates are highest among children. So when we're talking about whether or not to include children in the basic income, I think we are excluding a vast number of the people who are actually poor by categorically excluding them. So I get it about not talking about poverty, but it is very personal for many. Any other, yes, in the front.
I just want to say really quickly too that I'm not saying that poverty isn't personal. What I'm saying is that 60% of the country is worried about losing their job. And 60% of the country is not living in poverty. So like a lot of people are worried about what could happen. But the people in poverty absolutely know exactly why they need a basic income. It's just most people aren't worried. It's like everyone is a temporarily embarrassed millionaire, like that kind of thing.
This added to the poor are always with us. With the BIG, in other words. But this added.
Yeah, go ahead in the front.
Yeah, I guess I want to just add a quick comment because and I had questions as well. There were some comments about the progressive nature or regressive nature of taxation. And I've done some calculations on this, and it seems like Yang's proposal would actually reduce inequality pretty dramatically. So one sample statistic is that currently the top 1% hold about 10% of its disposable income, and under Yang's plan it would be about 8%. So there are other ways to measure that as well. So feel free to respond to that. But also I was curious, Almaz especially, about the VAT as a wealth tax. So economists sometimes talk about the idea that if you have a VAT or some sort of consumption tax, because people eventually have to spend all their wealth, if that consumption tax is viewed as permanent, that is essentially a one-time tax on your current wealth holdings because it reduces the purchasing power of those wealth holdings in perpetuity. So I don't know if, how you feel about a VAT in that lens compared to a true wealth tax.
Let's get to more Christine and then the gentleman in the front.
Oh, I just want to highlight that increasing income or reducing income inequality doesn't do much if the prices of education, healthcare, and housing are going up faster than whatever income is being given in any form. People talk about rents and homelessness. A lot of homelessness is due to really bad housing and zoning laws at the city level, and an income proposal may help in certain ways, but it's not going to help in other ways. So I just also wanted to say there's huge sort of other issues we need to be focused on too in terms of the prices, because standard of living is a function of income and prices. And the price of education and healthcare and housing are rising unsustainably.
Hi, I'm Leandro from Brazil. In Brazil, we don't have these primaries mechanisms for the parties. Members and its boards choose who's going to run directly, but only once in Brazil history we had a primary, and it was Eduardo Suplicy against Lula. It was in 2002. Only members were allowed to vote, and Lula won by 85%. Eduardo ran his campaign only based on basic income, much like Andrew Yang is doing. Of course, that if he was asked, what do you think of healthcare? What do you think of education? He was telling everybody the same thing. I think we need to strengthen that. I think we need to protect that. But his main proposal was basic income. Lula won by 85%. And before that, Lula had never really supported basic income. But 2 years after he got elected, he signed the law that was proposed as a bill by Eduardo in the Senate. So it had an impact for the government that was coming. So you know the story, some of you know the story, but we had the impact that we needed, although we didn't win the nomination. So I think maybe you should check that out about this and how it turns out that now we have a national law that's something for later, but that's how it went.
Let's hear from Jesse, then Ray. Back there. Yeah, thank you. I just kind of wanted to comment on Scott's address by saying, like, how do we make this more accessible? How do we get more people here? And I think that I've been trying to make myself in the business of doing that because, like, I wish I could see more diverse voices at this Congress. I wish that I wasn't the only artist here and that there were doctors, social workers, politicians, and yay, more of you, and also people with lived experience of poverty. One of the criticisms I had with some of the ideas and talks were that a lot of people were theorizing about poverty, but then it sounds very different to an academic to theorize than does to people with lived experience to hear these things. I think that, like, there's a lot of really great work to engage the public to make these ideas easy to digest. And like the work that you do, Scott, is incredible in doing that. And I think we need to continue doing that and opening and creating spaces to make these ideas accessible. And I think one of the ways is through storytelling, like I said when I was first here. And we all have skills and roles, and it's great, like it's amazing that we're all here across borders and working together on this and united in this. And so I just want to say, like, if we can make these ideas inspiring to people, shift these narratives, because some of the dissenting narratives are sort of about the idea of like a work ethic, you work hard for the money you earn, and if you're getting a basic income, it's free money, and shift that narrative away and into the idea of basic income as a human right. And doing that through making everything accessible and telling stories. Yeah. Ray.
So you'll have to forgive me, I'm from Canada, so your political system I've watched in horror basically from afar, so I might be wrong.
It's a general consensus even for Americans.
So, my question is kind of like, there's a lot of energy behind the Yang Gang, but from where I sit in the far north in my snow, your politics aren't based, your president has very little power to make things happen, and I mean, your Congress is a garbage fire. Like, you can't, kind of like when Obama came in and everyone had hope for healthcare, but GoFundMe is your largest healthcare provider right now. Like, what the fuck, guys? What is your country doing? So you can have all of the excitement you want for Andrew Yang, but if you still have a shit pile Congress, what are you going to do?
It's the Senate, actually.
Well, whoever's in charge. Somebody with lots of money is in charge, and it's weird.
Let's bring it back to the front.
So I can answer that one first. First of all, yeah, all of us think it's a garbage fire just like you do. As far as like strategy goes, like, if there's enough momentum building up for like a presidential candidate, and so like let's say we saw this actually with Sanders last time around. So Bernie Sanders didn't win, but there was a lot of down ballot, and there was also a lot of people running after the fact going like, well, this person was speaking my language, and we need to have a lot more people like Bernie Sanders at the local level running for the Senate and Congress and even for state representatives. And so sure enough, like that's why AOC is now in Congress, was because of Bernie. And so the more people like AOC are in Congress, you're going to see a lot more changes. We're seeing that with like Rashida Tlaib. So she just announced like her own plan, which is very close to a basic income. And so the more people who are pushing for someone like Andrew Yang, then we're going to see a lot more people running on those same policies, pushing the same things in these other places, and then that's how we get this change necessary in this country, especially if we're able to get things like ranked choice voting and these other reforms that we need to make as well, that we can actually expand democracy and actually get things done with all the things that there is a large amount of support for, but we're just not able to get because we don't really have a democracy in this country.
There is someone running for Congress on a UBI from East Harlem. He was here yesterday. James Felton Keith, yeah. So that's,
yeah.
Can I answer that too? I want to go back to Max, what Max said about the VAT as a wealth tax. I don't quite get how a VAT is a wealth tax, because actually the wealthy don't have to consume their wealth. So maybe you and I could talk about that offline. You could explain that to me later. But and if I'm not mistaken, your model showed that the Yang freedom dividend could reduce income inequality, correct? But not wealth inequality.
I calculated income, not wealth.
Okay, all right. So wealth inequality. So income inequality is a huge problem in the United States, but wealth inequality is a separate, adjacent problem that is also huge and very related, right? So what you can conceive of a basic income of, my proposal, a $6,000 basic income for all adults and children could be financed by a wealth tax of 1% on wealth. And if we actually had that kind of basic income, it's equivalent to redistributing wealth in the United States to a much more progressive level. So right now, the private wealth in the United States is about $300,000 a person. So that's for every man. Again, this is an average. So for every man, woman, and child in the United States, $300,000 in wealth. That would be if we divide the wealth equally. A $6,000 basic income is essentially like an annual dividend on $120,000 of wealth. So that would mean that effectively, if you had a $6,000 basic income, it's like having $120,000 in the bank where you don't have to touch the principal. In the United States, 50% of Americans have virtually nothing in the bank. They have no net wealth. 50% of Americans. That means that they are completely at the whim of the labor market. They're completely subjected to work discipline and must earn their everything in the labor market, everything that they need to survive on. So this is why I harp on this idea of taxing wealth and of redistributing wealth, and also of making the basic income available for children as well, because of the poverty issues that Erik so eloquently spoke to earlier. There was a question about Yang, and I think this is I think from Leandro about Lula and Eduardo. Yang has many other progressive policies as part of his platform, so basic income is only part of it. I mean, I think he's an incredibly attractive candidate on many of those other policies as well, so he's not really one-dimensional, although he is emphasizing the basic income. I completely agree, our Congress is a garbage fire, and I do think that the point is well taken, that we do need to focus on the president, the presidential election, but we also need to focus on Congress, and particularly the Senate, because of our electoral college system. And one of the exciting things about this particular presidential election is that we have candidate Pete Buttigieg, who, the very first time I heard him on a radio program speaking about his candidacy, first thing he brought up was the electoral college and said, we have to get rid of it. And, are we going to get rid of the Electoral College? Not, anytime soon. But even somebody bringing it up, to me, that's as important as Andrew Yang bringing up the basic income in a presidential campaign. And so we really need to think particularly about the Senate and how we change the balance of power in the Senate, which is heavily dictated by the inequalities of the Electoral College. The last thing I just want to say here is one of the things I think we need to think about as a basic income movement is, how does social change happen? And I'm not a scholar of social change, but I've done a little bit of looking into it, partly to try to understand how Social Security came about in the 1930s and the role of the Townsend movement, which was a movement in favor of essentially a universal basic income for seniors, what role it played in bringing about the Social Security system that we have now. There's a discussion paper, I think, about this on the USBIG website by Brent Rinaldi, which I highly recommend to you. But based on what I've read, what I've learned about social change is that social change requires, at least really four things. There has to be a kind of an opportunity. Something needs to happen that sets the stage for something, for policy, for the need for a policy. We definitely have that in spades for basic income, inequality, poverty, job insecurity, etc. You need grassroots, a grassroots movement. You need political support, but you also need expert support and analysis, because when there's grassroots demand for something, it tends to be for an answer, for a solution, but not necessarily for the means to get there, right? Then you might have politicians feeling that pressure from the grassroots support and say, hey, we need to come up with some kind of, security program for seniors, we don't really know what it should be, and they will look to experts who will suggest various alternatives, right? So I just want to make it clear that there's a role for those of us who are proposing other alternatives, because we have some grassroots pressure, not enough, but hopefully that will grow with having politicians like Andrew Yang who are bringing basic income to the public. And then as people actually think about how to implement the basic income, they'll be looking to experts, some of us, some of the work that's being done in the pilots, some of it that comes from other countries, from our dear neighbors, the Canadians, who have figured out how to do a lot of things that seem like they ought to be things we could do in the United States as well. So we all have a role to play here as well. But we need to think about how we all work together towards a solution that can be implemented. And I think all of this kind of debate that we're having right now is part of making that road of change happen.
Let's get 3 more comments. The person in the black shirt right there, and then blue shirt over here. Sorry for this kind of labeling. And then Sumi, I think, had a comment.
I'm Rick Lim. I'm actually working on a documentary. I'm from Canada, and just want to share a bit of what I've experienced, like what Brazil and you mentioned about politicians. So it seems like it's hard to get through politicians. You notice that in Canada too. They don't want controversial topic, potentially controversial. And you see at the Universal Healthcare, Tony Douglas, our national hero. He has to go through a lot. He has to go through against U.S. healthcare insurance company, anyway, lobbyist effort. But anyway, so politicians generally back away from controversial issues unless it's gain traction. So what Andrew Yang is doing probably could potentially, even if you have stubborn Congress, if they start seeing it's a very popular issue, and they might start supporting it also because eventually they want to get elected. And that happens to our, several prime ministers already conservative during NAFTA. Brian Mulroney was published in the paper saying he's looking into guaranteed income, and I guess the liberal kind of made fun of him, and Quechen was kind of looking at guaranteed income, and conservative made fun of him, and Trudeau right now, there's a hint that he's looking at basic income, and immediately there's a conservative press that's saying why that's this ridiculous idea. So, but anyway, my basic point is once you get momentum going, then I guess you can get other politicians on board.
Excuse me.
Yes.
What am I doing? What am I doing?
There's 2 guys in blue shirts. There's confusion here.
He defers.
Blue shirt. Just something I'd like to bring to your attention, and perhaps Andrew Yang might be interested in this. A small group of Australians set ourselves to have a look at national economics from the point of view of doing national accounts. And believe it or not, we did the first profit and loss account ever done for a nation, and it was done for the United States of America because that's where the statistics were so readily available. And by doing that, we discovered that the consumer products produced and sold in this country were actually $2.4 trillion higher than the total incomes of all Americans aggregated together. And that actually amounts to $7,500 per person. That's 6 months old children, that's everybody. And the profitability of this country is quite amazing. Nobody talks about countries being profitable. We all talk about corporations being profitable. But actually the United States is very profitable. And it's a wonderful argument for the basic income because you can afford it. All you got to do is do a profit and loss account. Now, I can't say much more about it today, but that national profit and loss account is available on the internet, and there's some bits of paper being passed around yesterday. You got one there. Somebody might be able to bring it to Andrew Yang's attention.
If we could keep it short, because we don't have a lot of time
That went
left.
to private wealth, that those trillions.
Yeah, the profit, the only way Americans can get access to that profit is by going into debt. The profitability of America was $2.4 trillion product above incomes, but Americans had to go into debt by $2.3 trillion in order to buy that. And if you don't go into debt by an approximate amount, you can't buy it and the whole economy goes into recession. So it is a debt-based system, not only in America, everywhere. We're trying to address it. So I'm just raising that as something that might be looked at.
Okay, 30 seconds. And then Sumi, and then...
Yes, I'm going to echo that point and also the point that was made about prices. If you don't have price controls, basic income is just going to end up subsidizing the rent seekers. And so you have to be able to harness away, either by taxation, anybody that engages in rent seeking. And education, housing, and healthcare are replete with rent seeking. So I think first we need to do price control, and then we have to see how prices go and if we really need the basic income. Because right now we're chasing, we're trying to chase, a cheetah, and we're like a tortoise. You give basic income of like $10,000 to $20,000 per year, and boom, all of a sudden the prices are going to go up. Then what are you going to do? You're going to increase the basic income again? You're going to be putting more pockets to the rent seekers. So I think I admire the intentions, but sometimes good intentions is the sure way to hell. So I think the issue of price controls and rent seeking needs to come first, I believe. And thank you.
Sumi.
Yeah, I usually just shut up, but the description that Almaz gave about VAT is incorrect. So because it's being recorded, I want to just correct that, and maybe the documentary director, you could edit it? Yeah, and then just a few, informational stuff, right? So I studied taxes, and I think you have really keen eyes. I think it is not about wealth tax. It's nothing to do with the wealth. And then economists never talk about VAT in the context of a wealth tax. So in that regard, Almaz, you're right. And the reason we...
not make this about me.
The reason we impose sales tax or VAT is because we need the revenue, right? So there are a lot of different purposes of taxes, but sales tax and VAT is imposed to generate revenue, to provide services. That's one. A lot of economists like VAT. So economists will not be behind the UBI, a lot of them, but they're gonna be behind VAT. And VAT seems pretty small part of Yang's plan to fund UBI, but it is very smart, well-researched, and bold proposal, in my opinion. And to provide, we talk about net cost and gross cost for UBI, but we know that it's gonna require a lot of money, right? For sure, we are on the same page. VAT is considered to be money machine. It generates a lot of money. So there are sociologists and economists even think that the reason why European countries could build their level of the welfare state is because they have a higher level of VAT, 80%, 20%, and in some cases for liquors and bad stuff, they have even more higher VAT. So I'm gonna tell you this, on the left, they don't like VAT because it's regressive. Point well taken. On the right, they don't like VAT because it's a money machine because they want a smaller government, right?
Right.
But if the left realize that if it's a money machine, you have to be behind that. If on the right, if you know that it's regressive, they might be for it, right? So think about it, and I encourage you to watch some YouTube video about how VAT works.
Excellent.
That's it.
Thank you. The floor, 15 seconds, last words, or you good?
Well, now that I've been publicly humiliated for my explanation of VAT, I just want to say, actually, I completely agree, and I'm sorry for misspeaking about it earlier, but the point that Sumi made that I think that we want to emphasize here is that the VAT in Europe, in European countries, is part of a social contract in which many of the expenses that Americans have to pay for out of their pocket are paid for collectively out of not just the VAT but other taxes. Payroll taxes are also very high in Europe as well, right? So they have free college, they have free high quality schools, they have free health care, you know, they have lots of other basic pensions and so on. That we don't have here. So I think it's dangerous, you know, so I'm on the left, and so I'm not crazy about VATs because they're regressive, but I also don't want a VAT to be the money machine that then replaces other more progressive forms of taxation, and we don't get the welfare state that the Europeans have.
Any other, you know what, we're trying to wrap up, so I think, do you guys want to respond at all, or 15 seconds tops?
Yeah, I mean, I would like to. So just to go off what you were saying too, if this is you know, about left and right, and you're getting them to see both sides, and so like, I mean, I'm wearing my shirt. You know, basic income is not left or right; it's forward. You know, and I've been excited to see that this idea that I've been really pushing for as an important message was actually taken up by the Yang campaign. And so they're saying not left, not right, forward. And I just think it's fascinating that there are actually Republicans who are actually signing up as Democrats so they can vote for Yang in the primary. And what's funny about that too is that there are Democrats who are upset about that and worried that maybe that means he's a Republican. And I think that's funny too, because in the general election, if he were to win, I don't think that Democrats are going to be complaining about Republicans voting for Yang as a Democrat president. So, just want to put that out there.
Larry, last words?
Yeah, one thing I think that we can get caught up in is feeling that the campaign may be not talking enough about poverty because we're in the School of Social Work and we recognize the cost of poverty, but it seems that with Andrew's push that has sort of skyrocketed him has been about automation, but he understands the impact of a UBI on poverty. So if this strategy has sort of in such a short time really captured people's attention, and we know and he knows and recognizes how the impact will be on people's health and well-being and their potential in being able to rebuild their own lives with that foundation, then we don't really need to worry about the messaging of what's drawing people in, because we know that the impact of the UBI that he and the rest of the country that will help push forward to implement would have such profound impacts that everyone in this room has talked about over this weekend and for many, many years and decades. So let's not worry too much about, the right message that we think would better speak to different aspects of the community, because this seems to be working, and he is cognizant of the message of including poverty in his speeches, but the impact of poverty alleviation through a UBI, none of us would question or could question. And I think that's something we should remember as we push forward with this and get excited, because the cost savings alone, in the end, will pay for a UBI. And I'm pretty sure that the potential and the opportunity that will grow from a society with UBI will be hard to imagine, but we can get there.
Thank you. Thank you, Silberman. Thank you. My